So this is just a short speech for consecutive, and I'm going to speak about the railways in the UK and rail transport. Ladies and gentlemen, it was during the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom when the steam locomotive was first developed. Many ideas for market capitalism were also developed at a similar time in the UK. But it seems that in my country, these two inventions or these two developments have not really worked well together. We never seem to get rail right. And I was just reading the news today. At the time of recording this, it's early January 2018. And I looked at the news and saw a piece of news which rather got my goat a little, that upset me a little bit, because I saw that once again the prices for rail transport have gone up. So what do I mean by the fact that market capitalism and rail transport hasn't gone very well? Well, before 1994, the UK had a largely public system of rail transport, so the government invested in our railways, and the government ran the railways, managed most of the setup. And then in 1994, the decision was taken to privatise large parts of the running of our railways. And it seems that since then, the situation has gone from bad to worse. Many believed that by privatising the railways, by getting the government out of the management of the rail transport, that would mean that we would be able to do away with inefficiencies, we would be able to have private investors coming in and improving rail transport. But in my view, that has not been the case at all, and I think many Brits would agree with me. Every January, so at the beginning of every year, we see rises in the price of rail fares, and this year has been no exception. At the beginning of this year, 2018, we heard an announcement that there would be a 3.4% rise in rail fares. And just by coincidence, the Minister for Transport happened not to be around at the time that this announcement was made. He was away on a business trip abroad, somewhere very far away. And so, unfortunately, he wasn't able to answer any of the questions that the rail passengers had for him, or any other members of the public or the press. So why is it that people had so many questions for the Minister for Transport? Well, as I said, these rises in rail fares happen every year, and often they are above inflation. And this year they have been quite far above inflation. The rise that we have seen in the cost of travelling by rail is actually 3% higher than the rise in average earnings. So ticket prices are going up much higher than people's salaries are. Now, one of the worst things about rail transport in the UK is that the government does actually still invest in our railways. The government does put in money. It maybe puts in half as much money as Germany does, for example. But the difference is that the German government reaps some of the rewards, whereas the British government invests and gets very little in return. Now, some would say that this shouldn't be a problem because in the UK we have a good network. We have many cities that are well connected by rail. The trains are quite fast, maybe not as fast as the ICE trains in Germany or the TGV in in France, or the Frecciarossa in Italy, or the Ave in Spain, or basically not as fast as most other places in Western Europe, really. But that's not the point. But many people say that the commuters are able to get to work, and that's the most important thing. People should be able to get to work by rail, and so we do indeed have a network which allows people to do this. And the private companies that are in charge of our rail have been investing in our tracks for a few years now, and we have seen improvements. And I have to say, in my own personal experience, I have seen some improvements. Every time I go back to the UK, I notice some kind of difference with the rail transport. But there seem to be just as many delays as anywhere else in Europe, and the stations are not always clean, the trains are not always in good repair. So although some improvements have been made, they're not, in my view, very significant. Rail companies say they are investing, but passengers continue to complain about overcrowding, and there are many complaints about delays that are just getting worse and worse. So as I was saying, the government does have to invest in our railways. The government invests in infrastructure, investing in the tracks themselves, investing in bridges and tunnels, and all the while private companies manage the other parts, such as tickets and selling food on the trains. And it's those parts that the private sector manages that are really the profitable areas. So what we find is that the taxpayer has to pay money in order to fund our railways. The passengers have to pay more and more money each year, putting more money aside for their tickets. Their ticket fares are rising. And then we have private companies that are the ones who manage the profitable areas of rail, and they're the ones who collect the profit at the end of the day. And after all, these private companies are not doing anything that the public is incapable of. We could have public management of rail, and I believe that we would be able to manage, the government will be able to manage the situation in a very similar way to what we're seeing to the job that the private companies are doing. Thank you for your attention.